Forum and a former director of the Congressional Budget Office. He was also the chief economist of the President's Council on Economic Advisors under President George W. Bush. Great to have you on the show.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
And during budget season, no less.
Yes,
So
but not in Washington.
Yes,
so.
Well, that's also true. You wrote in the Hill that it is like the Super Bowl for budget wonks and those who love them.
It's
so no
beside
more.
myself with joy.
So, Doug, I feel like we're going to have differing viewpoints here because I know you're not a fan. Yeah.
Shocked.
I feel you are not a fan of the Murray budget, but here's all I'm saying. Whether or not you like it, she does offer both spending cuts and revenue. Maybe not as much in spending cuts as Republicans would like, but it seems like Democrats are more open to compromise than Republicans when it comes to the basic issue of spending and cuts. Do you disagree with that?
Well, yeah, I will, and I have to fill my role. So first, let me just throw numbers at you and see if I can pummel you into submission.
Exactly.
I mean, the key here is that you take the emotion out, take the disagreement, which is real, out of this, and just recognize that the CBO put out its most recent projections of what happens if we go on autopilot. So imagine gridlock and we don't fix anything. We've already got over $16 trillion in debt. We run $7 trillion in deficit over the next 10 years, and we just can't do that. I don't think there's any disagreement that we're on an unsustainable track, so something has to change. So that gets you to, the House and the Senate, the choice that we now have at the moment. And my problem with the Senate side is, yes, it raises $1 trillion in taxes, and I would like to know how, because how is as important as how much. But it doesn't cut spending. If you dig through the gimmicks, we're $600 billion up, we're not down, and that means we're not changing trajectory. And that's my concern. That's a dangerous thing for the country. And it's a disservice, quite frankly, to the constituencies that presumably we're supposed to care about. Because if we don't fix this, we don't take care of Medicare, then seniors are in trouble. I mean, and that's not right for them. If we don't fix Medicaid, that's a bad program for low-income Americans. So my disagreement with the folks, like you who are desperately wrong in this issue, is that... Did I say that right?
No, you meant to say deeply correct. Right. It's like I'm flanked.
That's my concern, which is that to say we don't have a problem is to say we're not going to fix things that desperately need fixed. And that's the problem.
But I think
you don't have to like Paul Ryan, so we're allowed to disagree on that. But you got to fix something.
There's a false equivalency here. There is some argument that it's as if people on the left don't understand that we do need to do something in terms of reform for the social safety net, to keep it, to preserve it.
I'm not questioning their grasp of the need to change. I'm questioning why they won't.
Well, but I don't agree with that. I mean, the president has put out chain CPI, he's put out means testing. I mean, he has said these words which are political kryptonite. Now, maybe he's not pushing them on the American people, but he's put them out there. It's on whitehouse.gov. Furthermore, I think it's a question of the timeline, right? I mean, there are economists, and everyone can jump in on this, but there are economists on the right and the left who say, look, right now is not the time to be cutting. It is a time for stimulative measures, and then deal with the spending a little bit later down the road when we have actually factually recovered. Ryan?
But the idea that Paul Ryan wants to cut entitlements in order to save them is the same kind of reasoning as we need to destroy the village in order to save it. We don't believe that from Paul Ryan. But Obama has come out and said, look, I'll cut Social Security, I'll go after Medicare in all these various ways. There's no reason actually that we couldn't add the levels of debt that Doug's talking about. Interest rates are extremely low right now. There's a lot of unused productive capacity in the economy. There is disagreement over whether you could continue to run these deficits. So, I don't want to say that there's no disagreement. People do disagree over this, and that's the problem that Washington has right now. Is that everybody says, "Oh, we have to cut, we have to cut," and that's the problem with the Murray budget, is that it goes way too far toward the Republicans. So if you want to have the sharp debate that Schumer's talking about, debate the progressive budget, which actually adds spending and stimulus against the Ryan plan.
But we haven't cut spending, have we?
No.
Have we? I mean, seriously. I mean,
our deficit is lower than
right? Can we at least try that and see whether or not all of this,
as we speak?
But that's not cutting spending.
Sure, they're not.
You're still spending the money. You're just forestalling when you're going to make the payment. That's all you're doing.
Spending is still growing.
It's still growing. Spending in this country is still growing, and it is a very cogent and I think a sane argument to make that we need to address it from that side first. We gave you the $600 billion in new taxes. taxes on the top 1%. You want more. You want more spending, and as it was
Paul Ryan weaves those cuts into his budget.
So let's do policy, and then we can squabble about politics. But on policy, you're going to have to come to the realization that the spending programs have to change. We won't use the dreaded cut word. We cannot tax our way out of our promises and the growth that we have on the books. We can't grow our way out of it. It is unmistakable that all of the charades have got to stop and real changes have to come. So let's have a debate about the changes, not about whether we have them or not. And my problem with the Murray budget is it's about let's keep going. And my problem with the intellectual argument, which I understand about we can't cut now, is I will die a happy death if I hear one of the people making that argument someday say we can cut now. But they will never say that. It is always an excuse to not cut. And in terms of the politics, I say this lovingly to the president. He says a lot of things.
Right.
He talks nonstop. Put it in your budget. Write it down. He has an Office of Management budget. Price it out. Go to the floor of the House and make the case.
Okay, if
he hasn't done the leading on a legislative front.
I think
I'm serious.
Ridiculous to put all of this on the shoulders of the president who
he ran for the job. For God's sakes, do it.
Do you think the Paul Ryan budget is a serious document?
I think the Paul Ryan budget is a serious document, and I think it seriously takes on things that we haven't done in a long time. It's talked about balancing the budget. That's something that, as I said earlier this day with you in the group, we did that for 200 years to serve this nation well. We've gotten away from that. It was a mistake. It does tax reform. Everyone says, we should do tax reform.
Right.
It's got a tax reform, the revenue neutral tax reform.
Over 40% of its savings on repealing the law of the land, which is the National Health Care Plan. So, but you still consider it a serious document? I consider it an absolutely serious document because it's very honest about what it does. It says these are the numbers and these are the policies and the proofs of those numbers. I'd be happy if Patty Murray put out a budget that has the same bottom line numbers as she has if she was transparent and honest about how she got there. But there are so many gimmicks in that budget that as a former CBO guy, it makes me cringe. If you want to do that, and I respect people who, like the progressive budget, you want to spend more, I think you're wrong. I think you endanger the country, but be honest about it. Kurt, I want to bring you...
But Paul Ryan's budget doesn't really get to the detail of how he would make his cuts.
And it's full of gimmickry.
Paul Ryan's budget does more from a budget point of view than is necessary. He describes the policies that are in there. It's a fair defense on both sides that these are budget documents, and God forbid that the Budget Committee do what the Ways and Means Committee or the Senate Finance Committee's job is. I mean, we don't need that food fight. I get that. But they've laid out 3 times in the House what they believe the budget should contain in terms of policies. And I think the Senate should do the same.
Let me ask you, Michael Steele. Jeff Sessions in the Senate says that he is a top Republican on the Budget Committee, told a handful of reporters that Republicans may not offer the Ryan plan as an amendment when the Democrats bring up their budget resolution for a vote. Sessions praised the House Budget Chief, that's Paul Ryan, as honest and wonderful, but said Senate Republicans, quote, might have different views on how to move forward. And this is an interesting cleave.
Yeah.
This implies that maybe there is some liability in terms of signing on to Paul Ryan.
I don't think he's looking at it in terms of liability so much as he's looking at it in terms of other opportunities that may want to emanate from the Senate side. I mean, realize where you had Chuck Schumer lead off this segment for the first time talking about a Democrat budget in 5 years. We thank you very much
and that's good.
For all of that praise for a budget. Now, where were you in 2009 and 2010? When we needed that critical mass of having comparative argument over the direction of the country. This is where, again, I think the president has dropped the ball in sort of bringing those forces together. Set that aside. I don't think that at the end of the day, the Republicans in the Senate are going to be that far removed from where Paul Ryan is on his budget. What they're doing is laying down their own markers, the nature of the beast in Washington and the Senate, to lay down their markers and to say, okay, we see what Paul Ryan's doing, and we may or we may not take this or that piece. But again, it's part of the dialogue that needs to happen in both chambers. Because remember, even though, you're talking Democrats and Republicans, there's a big difference between Senate and House, where there's towards those alignments. So you've got that dynamic, and I think all of this is very good. But the key point is what you said. You got to be honest in your budgeting. You've got to be real about it. And I think that's where the real forces of this conversation is going to go next.
Ryan, do you think, in terms of the politics, as lame as they may be, does the Bryan budget end up being a liability for 2014 if you're a House Republican?
Oh, absolutely. The same way it was for them in the past. You can't target Medicare and have that not be a liability. You know, throwing all the gimmicks aside, are the long-term deficits, and I'll be curious to hear Doug say, long-term deficits are the function of basically two things: the health care costs rising over time and revenue being at historic lows. All of the rest of this is gimmickry. Social Security is good until the mid-2030s, and after that it can pay like 80% without any changes at all. Revenue and health care projections. I mean, once you deal with those two things, you don't have any long-term deficit problem. And I want to put problem in quotes because it's not obvious that it's even a problem.
And Doug, on that note, I mean, Kevin McCarthy was on.
Correct some facts.
Well, let me ask you one question. Kevin McCarthy was on Meet the Press, asked by David Gregory, will you accept any ratio in terms of revenue to cuts? And he says you're going to get nothing. You're going to get nothing on the revenue side. How is that a negotiating position?
So, well, it's a negotiating position. It's not an outcome.
Well, I mean, how is that? How does that send signal?
I want to be very clear about two points on the historic record on politics. Number one, the budget's not a liability. Well, Nancy Pelosi said it was her key to regaining the House. She is still the minority leader last time I checked.
They won more votes.
So this is not hurting Republicans. And the second is, every time when pushes come to shove, when Boehner sat down with the president in 2011, when they sat down again, Republicans have put revenue on the table. The day after the election, John Boehner put revenue on the table. There is no absence of Republican compromise. There's serious absence of the president being willing to do the same and take up the mantle. And that's what has happened historically. Now, the one thing with the long-term budget deficit, I just want to point out, one thing, they already took $600 billion for zero spending in January.
If you're talking about moving the goalposts,
let's just keep
continue on.
Doing arithmetic. It helps. The thing to worry about the long term is it's not the historic low revenues now. In all these projections, it's presumed the economy goes back to 5.2% unemployment. God, pray that be true. And that the revenues go up to 19% of GDP. So this is not a revenue problem at all. Number two, even if you close the deficit, and this is my major concern with what we're doing, you're stabilizing the debt at levels we have never lived. And so you are basically saying, hey, I'm happy playing Russian roulette with the economy for the next 20 years. I think that's a disservice. And I think we have to be more aggressive in debt reduction for that reason.
I think that there is a broad indictment of anybody that pushes back on the Paul-Ryan budget as being somehow with their head buried in the sand and incapable of understanding that we do perhaps have to do something in terms of reforming the social safety net, whether that is means testing or whether that is increasing the cap on personal income in terms of $116,000 being the limit to
I question neither your commitment nor your compassion. I just question your willingness to run for office and do that.
I am
My problem is that the Democrats aren't running it, writing it down and passing it.
For many reasons that cannot be detailed on this family program. You've managed to insult my math skills. We will have you back, and I will bring my calculator and disprove all of your hard right-wing theorems. But it was great to have you on the program.
Thank you.
Douglas Holtz-Eakin, president of the American Action Forum. Thank you for your time. You say tomato, I say tomato. You say pathway. Rand Paul says probation. At least he didn't